Okay, without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our presenter today. Jodi's actually a personal friend of mine. I've known her for 20 years, long time. One of my favorite people, very talented artist. In fact, the work that you see behind me, this is, I call it Jodi art. And you can find her pieces everywhere from Perkins to Park Nicollet to Fairview Clinics. Surprising, I go around and I kind of spy for Jodi art because you can see it in lots of different places. That's my personal bio, but I will share with you her formal bio. Unless Peggy, did you want to do the formal bio?
I don't have it here.
I would be.
Nope.
Got it. Great. So Jodi is a mixed media fine artist in Minneapolis. Abstract art, original fine art for sale, such as modern encaustic paintings, wall art installations, sculptural art, contemporary art, landscape art, and wall art sculpture. She also teaches encaustic workshops using R&F Paints as a core artist and acrylic painting and printmaking classes in her North Loop Minneapolis studio, and is a GOLDEN Artist Educator, GAEP. Jodi says, I love collaborating to create custom abstract art, original wall sculpture, painted acrylic wall art, corporate art, and commercial art installations for public healthcare, hospital and clinics, hotels and hospitality, corporate offices, and private spaces. Primarily working on commission, Jodi enjoys collaborating with clients to create artwork that leads to the next step in the progression of her process and development while complementing an existing space. The focus on her artwork has always been about the magnificence and beauty of nature and finding inspiration from nature's extraordinary colors and light. She says, as I explore this idea, I have been intrigued with nature's ever-changing seasons. So Jodi is joining us today from her studio, where the magic happens, if you will. And she's going to share a little presentation with us and also a real-life demonstration. And with that, the floor is yours, Jodi.
All right. Can I pin myself? Is that okay? I'll pin it and then I'll just be right here in case the dog barks or anything like that. Hello, welcome. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me. That's my nickname, so I always forget. I'm in my studio downtown Minneapolis, and I feel so lucky to be able to share what I love to do. And I use my artwork to connect with others, whether I'm teaching or working on some paintings. And the artwork I'm going to show you today is photographic based, like this. I've got a finished painting right here. So in 2018, I received a grant called the Minnesota State Arts Board grant. And as an artist, it's pretty fabulous to be in Minnesota because they value artists, I think, and to have some funding to give to artists. So I received this grant and developed some new work that I hadn't been working on before. And from that long list of supplies, so I do different kinds of mixed media, from acrylic paint to encaustic paint. And encaustic paint, I'm going to show you that today, is a very unique technique that dates back to Greco-Roman times. And it's basically molten heated beeswax with pigment added to it. And this is like a tube of paint, so to speak. And this is basically beeswax with pigment in it. And I'm going to show you a little bit later how I work with this. But just to kind of give you a little sense of that. And the beeswax is very translucent, meaning you can see through it. So I use that to my advantage as well, because you can really do a lot of layering into it. It cools very quickly and you can carve into it. And so through the grant last year, I developed this. I took the photographs at the Arboretum, the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, and they have a whole bee research center there in conjunction with the University of Minnesota. And I kind of consider myself a little mini scientist in a way. And it just allowed me this time to really research and get to the bottom of what's happening with the bee population in Minnesota and around the country. And I took it as an opportunity to use my art to raise awareness about the concerns. And they're having concerns, bees are, or pollinators in general, are having concerns about habitat, pesticides, and even water. And there's a lot of things we can do as individuals to even support them in our own backyards, and obviously also having some flowers that they can pollinate and get for their food, and then we get honey. And there's also a lot of native bees that I discovered in Minnesota. There's actually 410 species that are solitary dwellers, and so they live alone. It's a completely different situation where with the bees, we can see when they're having trouble at a hive, but if they're solitary, they're just living on their own. And so there's even more of a concern for them because we don't know exactly what's happening with them because it's harder to track. So that's a little bit of my research. And I just wanted to show you the process that I went through. So I basically received the grant, I wrote a proposal, and then it was sort of up to me to figure out how do I want to fulfill on that grant. And I didn't want to be another photographer that just takes pretty, butterfly pictures on flowers. I was really trying to develop my voice with photography, which I have done in my past, but really I'm a painter. So ideally, when I'm working with this subject matter, I'll just show you, just so you have something to kind of think about. Ideally, I'm trying to work with it that it's a painting and a photograph at the same time. So I will show you that whole process. And let's switch now to, I'm going to share the screen. I've got a PowerPoint presentation prepared for you, and hopefully we will just go right to my presentation and not my messy desktop. Woohoo! Can everybody see it? Okay.
No, I
You can't
can't.
see it? Oh, I know, I have to play it. Okay, there we go. All right, technical skills are not my best. So are we okay? Can you see this now?
No.
You can't?
Uh-uh.
So odd.
Yeah.
All right.
You know what? Let me do this again. Here, I had shared, allow participants to share screen. I just did.
Do you just see me or do you see my screen?
We don't see your screen. We see you. It's like nothing has changed.
All right, let's see if I can did that make a difference?
Mm-mm.
My presentation view.
And you click the share your screen button at the bottom of the Zoom.
Oh, maybe I didn't. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, back to our normally scheduled planning. Okay, I'm going to share this.
Hey,
Got it?
we're getting there.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Great.
Great. So I'm going to just start at the beginning now.
You can see the
so-
little slides on the side too. We don't have just the one pager, just so you know.
Say that again.
We can see all the slides on the side as well if you want to open up the
Oh,
presentation.
maybe
It's
that's
just
where I want to do this. Did that help?
perfect.
Okay, good. All right, thanks for training me how to do this. Just kidding. Okay, so so I came up with the title for the show called A Different View because I wanted to really call attention to the flowers. And I imagined that the bees were flying around with pollinators, which could be dragonflies, hummingbirds, butterflies, and just like a close-up view. So here's my token bee photo picture. I just had to get it out of my system, honestly, just to, because it's just so beautiful always to just get a close-up of a beautiful flower. So all these flowers were taken, or these images were taken at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. And I think they're letting people do drive-by tours or through the whole park. And it's still a spectacular place to visit, even if it's limited viewing. So this is the Bee Center. And I had no idea that they even existed there when it's a completely different separate area from the visitor center. And they have a whole museum there. So if you ever get a chance, it's really well done to educate yourself about what's happening, especially with our local bee population. And then they have hives back here. And when I came to visit the day of, I was lucky enough, they decided they could let me, we can open up some of the hives because they try not to agitate the bees too much by opening them very often. And the funny part was though, is I was wearing a dress and high heels because I didn't expect to actually go and look at the bees. So you could just picture me skittling around in the dirt with high heels and a dress. And then I have this full bee uniform on, which I'll show you. And one thing that I learned with bees is that the hives are they use them for two different things. They use them to house their eggs, and they also use them to house their food, which in my mind, I always just think it's all honey, but it's actually where their young are raised too. So you can see this is shiny. This is where the honey is stored. And there's me. I should have taken my high heels because it was just kind of funny that was going on. And I'm actually kind of scared of bees. So I'm kind of like, my heart's racing in there. But I'm getting up and personal. So that's kind of the experience I wanted to have. And there's just this like slight hum. It's just kind of a beautiful sound that they make. And then this one is, you can see where these are eggs. And the eggs are covered over where there's kind of that brownish orangish color. Those are like sealed. And then the other white parts are where the larvae are. So it's kind of interesting to just really take a look at up close when you know, going to a bee center and being able to see that. So there's different kinds of flowers and there's different kind of bees that their mouth parts, I found out, are all different and geared toward different flowers, because I just thought a bee is a bee and they just can pollinate any flower. And it's actually not true. They have specific mouth parts that are different for different kinds of flowers. And a bumblebee, for instance, has, because it's so heavy and big, there's only a few flowers that it can fly to, because it has to fly. It can't rest on the petals like the other bees do, because it would just slip right off. So the whole time it's actually flying and pollinating. And so that's why it's also large, because it has to kind of store a lot of energy to be able to keep flying while it's pollinating. So these, I don't know, these things to me were really fascinating as part of my research doing this art project. So it's like, eventually I got to get to the art project, right? So, and the other thing I found were that native bees come in all shapes and sizes. They're actually green. They could be the size of an ant. They are all different shapes. So not even just yellow and black like the honeybees. So sometimes if you see an insect, you might think it's just a random insect, but it might even be a bee. So if you see it on a flower especially, that's probably what it is. And just as a little reminder, dragonflies are also pollinators, and even wasps and hornets. Like, I know we don't really like them, or at least I don't. So anyway, so just that's kind of like the behind story. And I was at the Arboretum just taking lots of photos and just trying to get my groove on as far as my art making process. And I bought a really nice camera with my grant, but I hardly ever used it because it would just not be with me. So I ended up using my iPhone for a lot of the photos. And the happy occurrence, right? Like, as you've probably heard of happy mistakes with artists, but there's usually a discovery that happens that's exciting. And I think that's why artists enjoy this process. And my phone literally slipped out of my hand. And this was the photograph that I took. And I loved the depth of it, the perspective. I loved how some things were in focus and some were not. And that was how the series was born. For some reason, I just thought this was so exciting. And I didn't frame the shot either. So it was just the spontaneous framed shot that I sort of was like given, and I really loved it. So this is kind of one of the first places that I started taking the photographs. And then it's like, how do you replicate that? Dropping your phone and taking a photo at the same time? That's like not the easiest thing to do. But the idea was to get at least the feeling of, you know, this close-up perspective, but then having these blurry and also out of focus things as well. So I went back to the studio and I started playing with Photoshop just to kind of get a different look to the photograph, because I knew I was going to add paint to it. And so I had this idea that if I made all my images black and white, I would then have this space to collaborate with the background, so to speak, or really enhance the photograph. And also I simplified the image very much too. So this one got a little flattened out. But I'm showing you the whole process, kind of bringing you along with my my artistic process and journey, basically, and just really bring you into how I got to this body of work that I'm now making. So then, so this is a finished painting. It's a 24 by 24 inch painting, and I'm printing on, I'm going to show you really quick. I'm printing on tissue paper. So this is an image right here. And when I add the beeswax, it's almost like the tissue paper disappears because it sort of permeates the tissue. And then it's like the toner is just floating on the painting. So for 24 by 24, I have a printer that's larger, and I was able to print this in 4 12-inch squares. And then I basically butted the whole image up together to make the one image. So I divided it up in Photoshop and just printed it. And the blue and the green that you see is encaustic paint that I added layers and layers and layers to just build up this color very subtly. And I was going for this very soft focus idea of what maybe the bee would see, just kind of, you know, zooming around and playing around. So this image, when I print it, has to be on a, it's called a carrier sheet. And as that way you can actually print on any single kind of paper, as long as you tape it to another backer paper, like a piece of copy paper. So I also teach these workshops. So if there's any photographers out there, I'm happy to share this process with you because it really does add a beautiful texture to paintings and your photography, using it as collage and then including the beeswax. So I'm just going to kind of bring you through another image. So this was another one that I loved. I took it on the same day. And I loved how that one in the foreground just became very blurry, and then the focal point became the ones in the distance. And again, I took out the color. And with this process, I also discovered that when I went to shoot photos on a blue day, then I had this gray sky when I made it black and white. So then I went back to the Arboretum again on a cloudy day when I would have this beautiful white sky. And then I didn't have to do any Photoshop because I was trying to just keep, I wasn't trying to manipulate the photograph that much besides just putting it into black and white. And then this is the finished painting. So I think if you can see a little bit, there's some texture that's being built up again from that wax, lots of layers of wax. And I'm using the green in this case as a way to color the flower stems and then also the sky in the background. So I'll just go through another one really quick and just going to show you then how that is working. And when I look at each photograph, I sort of wonder, like, what does it need? Does it need to be black and white? Does it need color? And some of them I have left black and white because I am just such a purist in that way in terms of like no color. And that's why I'm doing a lot of subtle color, if there is any in the sky. And I've experimented doing yellow and orange, but then it just looks like the plants are on fire. So I'm kind of going back to just keeping it blue. It just makes more sense. I was going for a sunset idea, but it didn't really translate very well. And so this is another image. This one I ended up creating a painting that was 36 by 48. So really accentuating that, that feeling of looking really closely to the details of the flowers. And I think I did one more. So this one I just kept black and white. It just kind of depended on how the image printed and what my feeling was toward it. And so here's me in my studio. That's basically where I'm standing right now. I've got these mirrors on the side from the artist that was in the space before me. And that's one of my paintings that I just, left the black and white. And here's another one. And I also have a printmaking background, so I love to do repetition and pattern repetition. So that patterning that you see in this painting is screen printed texture that emulates a beehive. And I created that by taking a piece of cardboard that was from my TV packaging. And I just took off that layer, that's kind of that waffly cardboard. And if you take off that top layer of paper, you sort of get this grid of, it looks like a beehive to me. So I ended up creating a screen print that I could then screen print imagery onto my paintings. So that's part of that process. And now I'm just going to go through a couple of finished images, and the sizes are noted below. And I think I'll just kind of go through these, and then we can do a little question and answer time before I start with the demonstration. And a lot of these paintings are available to, I have a spot on my website called Available Artwork.
Ooh.
Do you like the color better? There's a lot more. There's a whole underpainting under this, actually a whole landscape. So because of that tissue paper being so thin, I can create these like really rich underpaintings and put the tissue on top and then let those lower layers come through. And I'm still experimenting. So some of them I think have, work better with color, and some are just the black and white.
Jodi, I love how you describe accidentally taking the picture that got it all started, like just that candor of you don't necessarily have the ability to plan out everything that's going to happen.
Right.
And then also, like you said, trying different colors, went, maybe that didn't work out as well as I had thought,
Right, like this one has orange. What do you think about that? Does it look good or?
I think they're all beautiful. It doesn't look like it's on fire to me.
Okay.
But I think kind of that idea of your critical eye looking at it as well is in that learning process. Just very, very interesting to understand kind of behind the finished picture that we see what went into it.
Yes. And it's, as an artist, I love that discovery process, because if I could plan everything out, it would be so boring, just like anything we do. Like when we go hiking, for instance, we want to have a new adventure. But if you had been there 100 times, you might not want to do it. And so it's that idea that, for me, art making is about that discovery. And a lot of things happen, you know, unintentionally, but then it's like, then I choose it intentionally going forward. It's like, okay, that happened, but I wanted to do more of that. So how do I do that? And I've worked with triptychs, so just breaking up the picture plane, still be hung as one painting, but just kind of breaking that up a little bit. And this had a full-on landscape underneath it as well, so some of that pink and green showed through. And I think this one I just got carried away with the blue, but I think summer that happens to me. I just love color with our Minnesota summers. And this was also a larger one, 36 by 48. And so the flower was probably 4 inches tall, but on this painting, it's about 30 inches tall. And I like that idea of just really encapsulating yourself, just almost like you're in the flowers with, you know, with the bees in a way.
Having a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids moment.
Right.
You're in the backyard,
exactly.
trying to get back to the house.
That could be my new title for my next show. So, and I just give a little credit where credit's due, because they unfortunately canceled the program this year because there's a lot of community components around the grant. So that's a little sad, but I hope they do bring it back next year, because they gave away, I think, 45 grants last year. And that's a big significant amount for artists. It's kind of a feather in your cap, so to speak. And, you know, it's like the community being recognized like that is really a nice prize. And I had been applying for it for 12 years. So, so I finally figured it out. I don't know what happened. I should maybe have Michelle help me with the grant writing process.
My pleasure.
Yes. So, all right, well, let's switch this back now. And if I can do that. Okay, stop share, right? That'll do it. So I'm going to switch it now to my demonstrating view. Does anyone have any questions right now about that process I just spoke about, or any comments?
Betsy?
Jodi, can you remind me of the timeline of this? When did you get the grant? When did you do the work? Was this pre-COVID, in COVID?
Good. It was 2018. So
Okay.
I received the grant. I applied for the grant in the summer of 2017. And there's board meetings and all this process. You don't find out for about 4 or 5 months before the grant process. So then, and there's a review process that you actually physically could go to as an artist, because it's through the state. They disclose everything. So I have gone to that process where you can sit there and listen to the feedback about your art. It's a little, it's good, and you know, it can also be hard to hear. But then, so I got the grant. I was awarded the grant in March of 2018, and then I had till January 2019 to complete the activity. So whatever I did within that amount of time, so it's basically a year. And the spring that this year, I don't remember if you remember, but there was no rain, and it was cold, and nothing was growing. And my clock was ticking, because I knew that I had, ahead of time, I had scheduled with the Arboretum to use their gallery. So they were on board with me using their gallery, and I didn't know exactly how it was going to work. But I finally was able to start taking those photos by accident in June. And then it took me to probably till like July, August, you know, playing around with the paint and just, you know, figuring out how I wanted my voice to be shown in this medium of photography with encaustic painting. And then it was like go time. I had to make 23 paintings by December. So, so I planned the show, and I knew I was going to have an opening reception in January. So, and it was funny, because all these flowers, people really loved having these flowers in the Arboretum during the winter time. So for me at the time, I thought, oh, this is the worst timing ever, that I'm having all these flowers in the winter. But actually it was a nice, I think, breath of fresh air. So August to November, December, I made a body of work, and then the opening reception was January. And then I did some community components too, like I did some open day workshops at the Arboretum where people could come and paint and experience encaustic painting. And then I also did a workshop there too. So with the grant, there is a very strong community component, and that you propose in the beginning, like how are you going to give back, basically. So it was a really great experience, honestly, and I'd love to have it again because it did push my work very far. And of course, having a little cash helps with that. I was able to take off some time from my full-time art practice and just make work and not, you know, be so under the gun to kind of make. So.
And you're still doing encaustic work now.
I am, yes. So I've been working with the beeswax for about 12 years, but this photographic painting work I've just been doing really since 2018. So.
Was some of your work at Brookview, Jodi?
Say it again?
Was your work hanging at Brookview in Golden Valley?
Yes, it was. Yes.
I almost bought a couple of those pieces when it was hanging in Brookview. As soon as I saw you start your program and I saw these photos, I'm like, I have seen those photos before. It was one of those going home and like, I need one of these. So yeah, that's so fun. Yeah, they're beautiful.
Well, you're welcome anytime to my studio. I have lots. But John Kuchka.
In the studio than looking, because I just looked on my phone on your available artwork, and while it's beautiful on the flat screen, in person, it even grabs you more, and it grabs you even on the screen. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. It is hard to capture that kind of translucent wax texture on photographs. I've had many photographers try, and at least people are happily surprised when they see it in person. It's not the other way around. Like, oh, it looks better in the photo.
No, it really.
Well, any of you are welcome to my studio. I've actually had some visitors just masked. My studio is large enough where we can definitely social distance. So if anybody would like to come see the work. And I even have a show right now at Traffic Zone at my studio building in the lobby gallery. We, as artists in the building, we rotate and just use the gallery space there. And I currently have a show up till August 14th. So maybe I'll pass that information along to Michelle to pass along. So, and that you can just come and see anytime you want during the daytime hours. The lobby is open from basically 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And you can just kind of tour that at your leisure or bring friends or whatever. So, okay, should I switch to, so thank you so much about your feedback about my work. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear that it was seen. So I'm going to switch my camera now to my demonstrating section. And so here I've got some paintings that are kind of just started. I'm going to move this, sorry. And if you can see here, this is a palette with the paint that is molten, meaning it's melted. And this is the beeswax with resin in it. So that's got a little bit of a yellow color to it. It's not from honey or bees or anything like that. It actually is a resin that comes in I'll show you this. It comes in pellets that you can kind of easily mix. And there are ways for you to mix your own beeswax with this resin. And the resin basically makes it so that it's an art material and it doesn't melt at such a low temperature like beeswax can. So I'm going to just begin by showing you. So this is an underpainting that I've already started. And when you work with encaustic work, encaustic is a word that's a Greek word. It means to burn in. And this painting has many layers on it, and you always want to work with a rigid substrate so that the paint will be very stable. So you can work on wood or different kinds of glass, things like that are very rigid. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to yell them out to me because I know it's hard to always remember to say that later. So, so these, I've got some tissues printed already of some imagery. And this one's going to be a super close-up, but I'm going to start by taking a panel, and I like to work on cradle panels that have sides to them. In that way, when I'm finished painting it, it can be framed or not, and it's sort of ready to hang on the wall. So the brushes I use are natural bristles because I am working with heat. The other kinds of brushes, I use mix that up, bristles will melt. So I'm using different kinds like goat hair, swine, not so great, but once you put the wax on it, you can't even tell. So this is also melted beeswax, and this is turquoise. And again, the paint comes in this little slub basically, and I can put this on my heated palette by just rubbing this and letting it melt. And I can also do different colors and can mix those together right on the palette. And then I would paint with it just like any other paint after you've mixed it. But as soon as you take this away from the heat source, it starts to cool very quickly. So there's a kind of a working fast momentum that I do. And this painting has some texture on it already, and that's why it's kind of showing up as a bumpy surface. I love the texture about working with Encaustic, because you can imagine it cools very fast, and so then that means you have to kind of work quickly. And then the last step is fusing, which is using heat to melt the paint onto the last layer. And fusing is really important because with other paints, when you paint the paint onto the last surface, they bond because they have either oil paint or acrylic paint. But beeswax needs heat. So you have to basically melt this last layer to the layers below. And ideally, when you're done, you'll have one layer of paint. I'm going to go ahead and do that now.
So Jodi, you're essentially melting it twice. Is that correct? You're melting it on the heated palette and then melting it onto the canvas?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So you have to have it melted to work with it, and then you want to melt this last layer to the bottom surface. So instead of drying like acrylic paint would dry and that would bond the paint together, or oil paint bonds by having the same oil, the beeswax has to be melted again.
What kind of shellacks it onto the surface?
Exactly. Yes. So so what I do is, like right now I'm looking at my painting or my my printout, and I'm just going to kind of put some blue in the sky. And I just started doing this, but I realized now I'm overlapping my flower. So another thing you can do is you can come in with metal scraper tools, and you can, this is like your eraser, you can sort of take it off in areas that you need to. And my wax is warm right now, but if I came back into this painting and it's cold, I would heat it up. So you can also use the heating process to warm up the wax to scrape it away. So I'm just going to kind of take away this part that's going to go under my flower, because I don't want my sky becoming part of my flower. Just a personal preference, I guess. There's no right or wrong, but, and I'm going to just use this as a way to give me some idea where I want this blue to go. So I'm just going to kind of brush this around the edges. And then I'm going to fuse it one more time. And this gets to be 1100 degrees, so a hair dryer will not work. I get that question all the time. If it did, we would not be able to dry our hair. It would be more like burning our hair off of ourselves. And I've got some white off camera here, and I'm just going to soften some of that blue that kind of got some hard edges. So you'll notice that when you work with the beeswax, it's very opaque, or it can be very translucent. And I'm just softening those edges by adding more white to it. And then I'm going to blend them again.
And you can't see it as well, but when the heater is on it, yeah, it starts to melt it, and you can kind of see them, they'll smear together a little too, like you would imagine.
Yes. And you heat it up until it glistens, meaning it's melted, and then you can stop. But you can, if you keep heating and heating, you'll get, because I do have a couple layers on this painting. This painting has seen a couple other things in its day. And so what's nice about that too is if you're not happy with how it's going, I just covered this up with white Encaustic paint and just started over. So it's very forgiving in that regard. I can just sort of bury everything that's underneath this. And I'm just like a cooking class. I'm going to go to this painting that's now a little bit more developed. And I did put some white, thinking about for the clouds and things like that. And this is an image that I'm going to use over this. And ideally, when I work, I like to have my tissue paper the same size as my painting area. That way it all has the same layering and surface. So I was kind of pretending like maybe this is like a field and this is foreground, and then the sky with a little bit darker blue. And this one is pretty smooth. And I do have a layer of Encaustic medium over this, just to kind of separate that paint from my printout. So I'm going to just now adhere that. And I use basically the clear beeswax to glue my image down. So I'll pick this up so you can see it. So I'm just using just the beeswax now with no pigment in it. And I'm going to let this basically glued down onto the painting. And then I can continue to build up layers over this tissue. And you saw how bright that color was, but it's not showing up super bright right now because that tissue is pretty thick. So then I'm going to fuse it one more time, and then I can come back in with the paint again and just start to build up the sky. And I'll even use a palette knife to just smooth it down and make sure it adheres well. And you can kind of start to scrape away some of the wax. Like if I want to have this flower more pronounced and not have as much wax on it, I'm scraping it away and transferring it to the side to get myself some texture there. And I'm working fast and also kind of just heating up. I don't know if you can hear me that well, maybe I'll stop doing that, but I'm heating up the whole surface so that I can really press with this metal palette knife and get that tissue to be embedded in the wax. So I'll kind of let you see how, do you see how shiny that can get? And it really is like no surface that I've ever worked with. I love it so much. And if I worked with acrylic paint, it would take overnight at least to dry. This just cools in 10 seconds. So I can really build up some beautiful layers and texture fast. So the last part I want to show you is I'm just going to show you how I would start to kind of bring in some of this blue into the sky. And let's bring in some green, maybe in the foreground just a little bit. And then I like to fuse it while this is, and then I'm going to move this paint around so it doesn't have that hard edge to it again. So just feathering out the color. So I would just continue kind of working the surface until I'm happy with it. Another thing that's beautiful about this wax is I can paint the clear over areas and it'll just start to push those areas really back and make them very blurry. Because even though the wax is translucent, it's as the layers build up, it starts to, you kind of start to lose the detail each layer you add. So in this case, if I wanted this flower to be really strong and the focal point, you can see now by adding that other wax, it really pushed back those other buds. But if I decide I actually don't want that, I can always come back and heat it up again. And I can just start to scrape away certain areas and then it's back. So I'm just kind of scraping it lightly, but I feel like this is a little bit nicer because it sort of balances out the composition that I've got the strong element here and then I've got these two others on that side. But I'm going to leave these two a little bit more blurry. I like the depth that that's creating. So those are kind of the things I'm thinking about when I'm painting, and it's fun to just keep scraping and building up texture. I'll just let you see if you can see that here. So yeah, so I teach these workshops. There, maybe a little bit better. I'm trying to get the window light to show you. So I teach these workshops, and I am gonna I'll switch my view back to the front on view. So I wanna, I had like a whole summer plan of teaching and then, everything changed. So I've been teaching a lot online with Zoom and teaching artists from around the world, which has been mind-blowing and amazing to be able to do that. But I do miss my people and I want to hold some workshops. So my studio is set up and I might be able to at least do one or two and just have everybody wear masks and keep separately. So I'm gonna see how things go, but I'm hoping maybe September or October. If we're spiking now, hopefully it'll get better. So. But otherwise, I do have recordings that I have already, I did live Zoom workshops and recorded it so that those recordings are available to view as well. So it's a new world, right? Like all this weird, I don't mean to call it weird, but it's just a different way to communicate, and actually it's making the world smaller in some ways that you can reach people you wouldn't normally never have met with as far as teaching art goes for me. So anyway, that kind of completes my presentation for today. Does anyone have any more questions about my process or about the painting that I worked on today?
Betsy?
Jodi,
No.
when you do teach those virtual Zoom courses, how do you get the materials to the students?
So that's a great question. So what I do is I make it to materials list. And so it's up to them to purchase because color preference especially is very personal, but I'll kind of give them all the basics. And then the demonstration part, they'll watch me and then they'll work on their studio by themselves. So it's more like it's how I would do it in the studio too, where I do a demonstration and then they get to work. It's just that they get to work in their studio. So they would have all that information ahead of time and could order those supplies so that when they watch the video, they could then start working. But I don't have them work with me. I think it's just too much to be able to like listen and learn, especially if I have, because the first Zoom workshop I did 50 people. And I can't imagine if everybody had a question, it would be like nothing would get done. So that was crazy. I had no idea how well that would go over. But I think at that time, this was in early May, and I think we were all hungry for, you know, what's going to happen, and we need to keep making art. So.
And your in-person workshops, people don't need to provide all of this stuff. You have the materials all there available.
Yes. Michelle is taking a workshop with me, and like you get the heated palette. Like basically you come in and my studio is your studio and you just bring your thoughts and your hopes and your dreams and you can just make work. So especially when you're beginning, I think it's nice to just have that available to you, and then you can see if you're drawn to it, if you like it, and then get the supplies for yourself after that. So,
Brian, did you have a question? Brian Rossi?
Yeah, I do. Number one, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the constitutional amendment that Minnesotans made. I don't know how long ago, 9 years ago, maybe? The Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. So as a performing musician, I've been able to take advantage of that several times. But when I was in Rochester, at Rochester STEM Academy Charter School, we had C. Anthony Huber, a local artist, come in and do a show, like the show that you did at the Arboretum. He did at our school, and it was fascinating for the students and the community to see it. His art show, everything was on the floor because he did like pavement art. He was taking pictures and creating asphalt and concrete paintings. They'd be about an inch or two thick, but they would lay on the floor the way you would normally see that kind of shape and form. So I'm really proud of Minnesota for having that Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, and I'm glad that you got a grant through the State Arts Board, which is funded through that amendment. So
yes.
Congratulations, your technique is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other
So,
questions?
any other questions?
Betsy shared your website as well as the link for Traffic Zone while you were presenting. So we've got that available.
Oh, thanks, Betsy.
And yeah, walking to the Traffic Zone really is a great, easy way to check out what's available. And, you know, I've known Jodi for many years and have had the opportunity to see her art evolve and change. What I didn't realize, I don't know, I'm not an artist. I kind of thought you did the same thing always. Well, duh. No, you do one type of thing and then you start moving on to another, then you go to another. So, you know, the pieces that you're seeing now in another 10 years, Jodi's gonna be doing something probably completely different. So it's just really neat to see that evolution, and they're all, I mean, all the different forms are amazing. So
thanks, Michelle. But when I describe it to my artists and my students, I consider it like a stepping stone, because each time you make something, it's like you're going in a direction, and then pretty soon, you know, 50 steps down the road, you're maybe in a different direction. And I think that's, you know, like a good metaphor for life and painting. And Picasso was one of my inspirations. And if you look at over his lifetime, he has several different styles, and it gets more and more abstract as he got older. And I think it's because you hone what you're trying to say in less. And so that's why I think abstract work is kind of meaningful. And it's also, what are they talking about? You don't know, because it becomes so personal to the artist. at that point when it's like their own abstract language, literally. But I tend to do this pendulum swing, I call it that. Sometimes it's representational, and then I go back to abstract, and kind of going back and forth. And right now I'm more in my representational phase. But yes, Mickey can attest to, even knowing me, 10, 12 years, that my work has changed during that time, right?
Yep, it's all.
So if you look at my website and go, whoa, how many artists are on here? It's just me. It's just me. It's all my different me's.
Jodi of the past. Well, thank you very much, Jodi.
You're
This
so welcome. Thanks for having me.
fantastic. I'm always mesmerized by watching you work.
Well, thanks. This is really fun. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to reach out or keep in touch about my shows or anything like that, I'd welcome that. So
Great. So as we close our meeting, Rotarians, our usual, we're going to recite the 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Bong. When we were in person, we'd always ring a bell, and so I have to say it.
Bong.
Yep. So thank you, everybody. Nice to see you. Enjoy this warm weather. We'll see everybody next week.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jodi.
Thank you, Jodi. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.